and
Sure.
then I will ask you questions. And I had already sent you a list of questions. I'll stick to those. And if I have any follow-up question, I can follow up with that. So firstly, thank you so much, Melissa, for doing this. I'm so excited that I'm getting the opportunity to capture your legacy. Um, and if the whole interview is not just going to be about you, but also a little bit diving deep into your childhood, into how you got into, wildlife, filmmaking, a little bit of background about your family, the connection between the two, and what is your intention, from this point forward, the kind of impact that you want to create. So I will stick to the questions.
Thank you so much for doing this. It means a lot. So I really appreciate it.
Melissa, let's not talk about it. I feel like I want to do more for you. Like you have a, what's the word? A golden heart? I don't know. That you're a
You
beautiful.
know what?
Yeah.
Karma, I think, is real, right? And so for me, I feel like I've gotten a lot of good karma over the years, and I'm just sending it on.
Let's start with you introducing yourself, your name, where you were born, and you moved to the US, and you're a filmmaker, and just basically a basic introduction, just saying, hi, I'm Melissa. I was born and raised in blah, blah, blah. I'm a filmmaker and I love blah, blah, blah. Like just a little bit, like there's no, there's like nothing specific, but just like what comes naturally to you. So yeah.
General. Yeah, my name's Melissa Lesh. I'm a wildlife conservation filmmaker, documentary filmmaker. I was born in Panvel, India, outside of Mumbai. And I grew up between Madison, Wisconsin and India. I'm now living in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm very passionate about the human connection to the natural world and stories' ability to do that.
Perfect. I know Panvel, by the way.
Really?
I've never been to Panvel, but I was in Mumbai for 7 years. So, all right. It's so
It's
funny that
funny.
you're from India.
It's funny because it's like when I say when I was born, Panvel was outside Mumbai. It was
Yeah,
on the outskirts, and now it's an international airport.
yeah,
It used
yeah,
to be just a bus stop.
yeah.
It's
Yeah, it's been a while.
wild.
2014 is when I left Mumbai. So it's been 10 years since I've been
I'm
there.
sure it's way different even in the last 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah. But connections, seriously, I feel like
Yeah.
it's weird that I'm talking to you and you're born in India. Like it's just weird. So can you share some background about your family and its history? Like just a little bit about your family, basically.
Oh.
Yeah.
So, yeah, both of my parents are artists. My mom is a cellist. She started playing Western classical music as a kid and transitioned to Indian classical music, which is why I was born in India. She was studying and performing classical northern style called Drupad. And my dad, he's an artist. He was painting and sculpting when we were living there. And yeah, both of my parents moved back to Wisconsin essentially, but we were still splitting time between India and the US as I was growing up with my mom.
So you have a very creative background, like both your
Mhm.
parents are creative, and that is what passes on to you as an artist, like you're a filmmaker. So so how do you think, you said you lived both in India, you were born in India, and then you moved to Wisconsin. Um, how did your upbringing influence your interest in wildlife and conservation? Like how is it that what part of your childhood can you talk about which kind of, or maybe it was a later thing in your life, like where you started getting inclined towards wildlife and conservation, like that as a topic, like it seems you're very passionate about nature and environment.
Yeah, I think there were seeds being planted from when I was very young, whether it's nature or nurture, I couldn't quite tell you, but I do know that I was always drawn to wild places. As a kid, I remember long walks in the woods with my parents. We used to go, our kind of vacation every year was, canoe trips on the Wisconsin River. So a lot of time in marshes and just in looking for mushrooms in the woods, and always drawn to, my dad would joke around like I was always turning over logs in the backyard looking for bugs. And I was that 5-year-old kid, where the teacher would ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, I want to be an entomologist. And they would say, what is that? So I was pretty obsessed, I think, with the wild and nature from a really young age. I don't think I really understood, how that related to conservation or this kind of larger, of course, career path that I'm now on at that time. But fast forward about 18 years. So I was at this point, I graduated high school a year early. I took off a year and was just traveling around India, doing a lot of volunteering. And I was looking for places to volunteer with wildlife. So I connected with an amazing organization, Wildlife SOS. I worked at a bear sanctuary. I worked at a leopard sanctuary. I was, any kind of service that I could be to these animals is where I wanted to be. And around that time, my mom actually, she had been doing some digging for me too, to try and connect me with other conservation efforts. And she connected me with a sanctuary, a woman running India's first private wildlife sanctuary in South India, in Karnataka. It was 300 acres of protected and restored, a wild ecosystem. It used to be a coffee plantation. And I started volunteering there, and I was working with this couple who owned and was protecting this land. And every day going out walking and seeing elephants and, leopards on the camera traps. And it was this pretty kind of wild experience, which I think actually those seeds were planted when I was quite a bit younger. This was in 7th grade. I lived with my mom at a wildlife. It was IIT campus in Hawaii, but it backed up to Borivali National Forest. So there was all this wildlife actually coming in through these major water pipes coming into the campus from Borivali. And oftentimes they would, get cracks and they would open up and leopards would come in. They'd use them as a passageway. So here I was, a kid, seventh grader, living in this quite wooded, wild campus with leopards. We'd had a curfew every night at 7 o'clock. We had monkeys coming to our window. It was just a beautiful time in my life. And I think about it as one of the most inspiring years. I started learning Bharatanatyam. I was painting. I started painting a lot of wildlife. So at that point, that was my form of connecting with, wild animals in the natural world. And I loved painting. Of course, my dad and I used to make a lot of art together as a kid. So that's what I knew, and that, I think that was my way, my creative expression of connecting with the wild. Then fast forward, I'm in Sai Sanctuary. I'm doing real kind of boots on the ground conservation work, and getting a sense of just how urgent the situation was and how much we were losing, in a way, these ecosystems and these species. And then, from then on, I really wanted to figure out a way to combine the arts and the sciences. And that kind of became my maybe subconscious mission. I wasn't, when I started making short films, I was actually straddling the arts and sciences. So I was in art school studying painting and printmaking, but in the summer I would get internships and work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at these remote refuges around the country. The first one was Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge, all the way up on the border of Canada. So I was living in this small, basically little cabin in the middle of the woods. And they had a camera on the refuge. And so I started documenting some of the work that we were doing. And I taught myself that summer how to edit. I YouTubed how to work on Final Cut 7 and how to create my own soundtracks, because I didn't know how to license music or anything like that. So I was starting to just create these short films, but it was about the conservation work, and it was about my interest in it. And so, yeah, I think that was my way again of like, how do I combine these two? And this this then became my creative expression. And so at that point, you know, I kept making these short films. I kept documenting this work. I started working with my university to then not just separate arts and sciences, but try to even combine them in my classes and in an academic sense. And yeah, eventually I was like, I think this is it. And I started my company, Emerging Earth Films. And at that time, the whole mission was to combine the arts and sciences. That's now grown, and I can get into my kind of present day, but yeah, my first kind of independent film was a Kickstarter that I started that took me back to Sci Sanctuary to film a short film there. So
Wow, I was actually like, firstly, you're a great storyteller, even verbally when you're when you're describing your childhood. And I could literally visualize your childhood. And I have not had such an interesting life. Like my exposure to wildlife was, I mean, I've never been exposed to that part of the life. So you led a very interesting life since childhood. And I like, you also mentioned that you used to take videos of plucking mushrooms and stuff like that. So I just recently saw your story. You were doing the same.
yeah.
So I was just like, oh,
I'm still that same kid. I'm still that
yeah.
same kid.
Yeah. No, but that's very fascinating with your childhood experiences and then flowing into your adulthood. And I like how your life was divided between the arts and then volunteering towards wildlife, organizations. So that was a nice, like the nice blend in your life.
Yeah.
Since so the next question is that you already mentioned it, but if I still want to dig a little into it, were there any specific experiences or individual in your early life who you would like to specifically talk about experiences as a childhood with your family? Because, at the end of the day, I want to capture your family legacy.
Mhm.
So can you think of something that has, a memory that you can talk about, which really, had an impact in your life with your family?
Yeah, I think again, like our way of a lot of people's families would go vacationing, they go to Disneyland, they go to, Universal, and we couldn't afford to do those kind of trips or travel abroad. I mean, we went to India, but that was on grant money, specifically for my mom's music. Um, and so our way of, kind of vacationing was canoeing, like basic outdoor adventure, but it was it was beautiful, and it was meaningful in the sense that, I don't think you need a lot to connect with the natural world, and you don't need to go to far-flung places. I had the joy and the unique experiences of two very different environments. Of course, India and Wisconsin couldn't be more different in many ways. But I think that there's wildlife and just natural experiences in all of our backyards, and even if you're in an urban environment, your local park or a stream, or, even just birds landing in a tree, like there's ways to connect with nature wherever you are. And so I think as a kid, that was something that was really instilled in me, and we would be kayaking the same stretch of river, or canoeing the same stretch of river that we did almost every year. And it was always different, and you would always find, I remember one year, part of the sandbank washed away, the way that the river kind of carves through the cliffs and the sand, and it washed away part of the bank and exposed this beautiful turtle nest. So a soft-shelled turtle had nested in the sand, and then that nest had been eroded. So we had this collection of I don't know, maybe 20 turtle eggs that we ended up incubating that whole trip, actually, and hatching and releasing them back into the wild, because we didn't want those eggs to get, destroyed or washed away or anything. So being able to hatch and release tiny little baby turtles, and as a kid, and it's like, oh, you just kind of stumble on that stuff, and it, I don't know, I feel like it kind of figures out a way to work itself into your being in a way that those kind of things you can't unsee or unexperience, you know?
Yeah. No, that's a beautiful experience. Um, Can I ask you the next question again around your family? That how did your actually, I wanted to ask another question, but let me come to that later. How did your family support or shape your initial interests um, in your career? Like, what was their role?
You know, it's hard to know, right? Because as an adult, it's it's hard to know exactly. You kind of absorb it just like subconsciously in a way, osmosis, right? Like what their influence was on me at that time. So it's hard to pinpoint, but I do know that both of my parents, especially my dad, has an incredible love for nature, for wildlife. Um, you know, I think both of my parents would always take me for walks. Like I said, you know, my dad and I used to go down to the lake, and there was all these beautiful cattails and red-winged blackbirds, and so, you know, whereas then my mom and I would spend time in India together, 'cause she was the one studying Drupad. So that's when we would, you know, have the monkeys come to our windows, and we'd name them all, and, you know, listen to them talk to each other and talk to us. So I think, you know, both of my parents had maybe not as um maybe as deep, but just not as practical in terms of wanting to turn into a career. But I think both of my parents, and my brother as well, he loves animals, he loves nature, he spends a lot of time, you know, in the backcountry. He's a skier and has an outerwear company. So I think as a family, that was something that we all really enjoyed together. And you know, it's hard to find, I think, any people on the planet that don't have some connection to animals. I feel like if they're domestic or wild, you know, there's something fundamental about who we are that that we need nature, and we need animals in our lives, you know, or are enhanced by, you know, having wild and creatures around us. So yeah, I don't know that there are specific experiences, but I do know that both of my parents really fostered and encouraged my love for the wild, and started with bugs, and you know, now it's gone to ocelots and snakes and everything in between.
Yeah, my love is for dogs. I think that's the one animal that, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, I went to New Orleans just last year, like to celebrate New Year's, and for the first time, I saw an alligator. And so which was interesting and exciting for me because I haven't
Anteater
seen
in
a lot.
New Orleans?
Yeah, we went for a swamp like tour, and
Oh,
in that
wow.
swamp tour,
Cool.
fortunately, we were able to find an alligator because during the winters they usually hibernate.
Yeah.
But yeah,
How
um,
cool is that?
yeah. Uh, oh shit, it's
Love it.
already 2:27. You have already talked about what inspired the creation of Emerging Earth Films. You've already talked about it, so I won't touch on that. In what ways? Okay. This is a more personal question. Can you talk about like if I had to ask you, like, what has been one of the biggest struggles of your life? Or like any challenge that has shaped you as the person you are today? Would you like to talk about it?
Wow.
This is just to get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's why, yeah. Only
Yeah.
if you're comfortable answering, huh? Like, I don't want to shove this word. Like, if you're not okay with it, then I will just keep the question, the last question here, which is around your family again. But this also you've answered. In what ways do you hope your family's legacy will be intertwined with your contributions to wildlife conservation?
Have
In
I
fact,
answered?
like in the sense you've already talked a lot about how your family played a role in supporting your love for wildlife and your love. So it is, so I think that will be a repetition. So the last two questions I had kept is what is one of the biggest struggles you've gone through, and what is the lesson you learned? These are the last two questions, just to get a personal end to the video.
Well, I don't know if this is the biggest. I've maybe I would say there's probably something bigger or deeper than that, but I don't know how I would. Actually, you know what? I would say that this is the biggest. Yeah, I think, one of the biggest challenges in my life, as a kid, like I said, I grew up in this wildlife filled, nature filled life, and family. And, it was before, basically my middle school, like right before middle school. Unfortunately, my dad was arrested and, went to prison, and I wasn't able to see him until I was 18 years old. And one thing so that was during the time when I was going to India with my mom a lot. And so she essentially became our sole caregiver, our guardian. And I didn't have access, I wasn't able to see my dad until I was 18, essentially. And as a kid, of course, you don't fully understand why this is happening or really what's going on. But now as an adult and having reflected a lot on not just what my dad did, but how it affected our whole family, there was ways in which it allowed me to really see for the first time and ask questions about some of the things that I went through as a kid, that have been life-changing for me. And conversations that I've had, with my dad for the first time, starting therapy with him together. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned from that, and now being very close to my dad, and we live in the same city, we have a beautiful relationship, I think is the power of redemption, and that someone can do something that harms others, that harms their family, that, can create a really painful wedge, essentially, between people you love. But that that there is room for growth and change and, renewal, redefining yourself, and ultimately redeeming, in a way, redemption. So yeah, that's it gives me this sense that, no one is not worthy in this life. And, bad deeds are done. People do all the time, horrendous things. But if we can continue to see the humanity, and we can continue to give people, that chance, and allow them to grow and change and reflect, I feel like we would have a much better planet on our hands if we didn't just write people off.
Thank you so much. That was such a vulnerable part of your story. And you are an open book. Like, that was very sweet of you to share, and such a beautiful message. So thank you for sharing that. So this definitely,
I was going to talk about brain surgery, and then I was like, no,
you had brain surgery?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I had brain surgery while I was making Wildcat.
Wow.
Yeah, that's another story.
But
I went right to the...
Do you have time to talk about it a little bit, or you don't want to talk about
Yeah,
it?
I can briefly tell you the story.
So you had, okay, all right. So you made the film in a span of, I think, 3 years, or it took you
4 years.
4 years.
Production was 2 years. Editing and post was 2 years. Yeah.
All right. Tell me your story about your brain surgery. This is ridiculous. Oh my God. Like, I mean, in the sense, you've gone through so much while making the film, which already took so many years. Okay.
Yeah.
I would
Yeah.
love to
So
hear that part of your and your lesson from that as well. Like how that, anything that you want to share from that. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm still figuring out what the lessons are, but
Mhm.
yeah, so while we were making Wildcat, which is our most recent feature film, um, that was a 4-year journey. During production, about a year into production, I found out that I had a cyst in the back of my brain, in my cerebellum, and like a egg-sized cyst, so not a small one. Took up a decent part of my brain. And I didn't know it was there. I found it completely by accident. I was actually on production for another project and happened to fall in my hotel room and hit my head. And Trevor, my partner, he was like, you should probably go get it checked. Just get just get a CT, make sure it's not bleeding or anything, there's no concussion or internal bleeding. So yeah, I went to the hospital. This was in Jakarta, got a quick scan. There wasn't any concussion. We were doing a lot of travel. So, that was checked off the box. But I saw on the bottom of my lab report, there was some note and it was some technical jargon. And I came back and I started looking up what this meant. And sure enough, these pictures online came up of people's brains with these big holes, essentially, these large black holes in them. And so I found out, I pulled up my scan, and sure enough, my brain looked just like that. And I, oh, so sorry.
No worries, no worries.
I don't know if that interrupted.
No,
Hold on,
no,
let
no,
me
that's
turn my
okay.
phone on.
Yeah.
On
You can
you know.
just pick up from where you left and
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I looked at my scan and I saw that in fact my brain looked similar to these images. There was a large black space, a chasm inside my cerebellum, and I ended up having to spend the next year monitoring to make sure it wasn't growing, because that was the concern. If it was growing, I was just beginning to feel symptoms, and so if it was growing, those symptoms would continue to get worse. And that part of your brain, you start losing your balance, your fine motor skills, your extremities. So I monitored it for about that year, and then sure enough, it was growing. They confirmed that it was growing, and I had to get it removed. So in the middle of filming Wildcat, I had a brain surgery operation, and they successfully removed the cyst. But I realized, I was after surgery, about a month after, I was back on the airplane to continue to film Wildcat. So I was flying out to Seattle to film Sam at her house in Bainbridge Island. And I realized a couple things. One thing, life is extremely precious and you just don't know how much time you have, and every moment can be a joy if you perceive it that way. I felt like I had a gift, those post brain surgery days and weeks and months were just absolute bliss, absolute bliss. Of course, there was a lot of pain and there was a lot of, physical things that I had to figure out, but I felt very, very blessed. I also learned the beauty of walking. I was always someone that was pretty intense, I always wanted to be whitewater kayaking or mountain biking or hiking or, doing something exciting and fast, and I couldn't do any of that when I was recovering. So I had to just slow down. I did a lot of meditation, being in my body, letting it heal, and just walking. I couldn't drive, I couldn't bike, so I just walked, and I fell in love with walking and with kind of slow observation, in many ways bringing me back to my childhood, where I would just walk through the woods and look at bugs and mushrooms and things. So yeah, it was a pretty intense but overall extremely positive experience. And I learned just how resilient my body is, and my mind. I think it's powerful when you're in the throes of something as intense as making that film was, and you're just forced to stop. you know, you just have to go inward. I couldn't look at screens, I couldn't look at footage, I couldn't go on my phone, right? So I was just kind of forced into this state of reflection and meditation. So it was actually what I needed at that time during a really intense production process.
Wow, thank you, Melissa, for sharing that. And I can't even possibly imagine. And the way I just have 2 minutes, 30 seconds left. So if the video disconnects, it's because of that.
Okay.
But I wanted to wrap up the interview just saying that, like, I can, you know, when you said that in the middle of making the movie, I had to look inwards, like, and really find the resilience in my body. Like, that was like, oh, that is the lesson. That is the biggest lesson. So thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate you so much.